So I think we shall begin. So welcome everybody. Thanks so much for popping in the chat where you're from. And if you can continue to do that, if you haven't already, it'd be really, really great to have a really, really interactive session today. So welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Laura Harris and I'm here on behalf of Evolvent and Forrester. I'm excited to welcome you all to today's session on the new change management, and today we're going to focus on automated and AI. First off, I'd love it if you could introduce yourselves if you haven't already, and also put in your company. That would be really amazing. I've just noticed that Chuck has joined us from Dallas. Hi there. Hi Pam as well from Iowa. Welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. So, kicking off today's discussion, we have Charles Betts, as you can see here on the screen. He's a principal analyst at Forrester. Following Charles, we'll continue the discussion with Sasha Gillenson, who is CEO at Evolvent. So, welcome Charles and welcome Sasha to the session today. Our goal today is to have more of a discussion, less of the standard boring webinar that we're all used to going to. So with that in mind, I'd love to encourage everybody to be really interactive. If you have any questions, do pop them in the chat and we will answer them at the Q&A session later on. During today's session, we sprinkled in a few poll questions for you. So the idea behind this is to exchange your insights for 2021 and any plans that you might have as well for this year. And just to share ideas, any ideas that you might have with your peers as well, would be great to share those on this session. To encourage everyone to share, we're going to make this a raffle. So anybody who participates in all of the 3 poll questions, don't worry, we've set up really easy questions for you. You'll be entered into the raffle to win a pair of the new Apple AirPods Pros that we all know and love. And by the way, if you do get any questions wrong, I'll be getting those. So make sure you give us the right answer. So before we get to the good stuff, let's kick it off with one of those poll questions that we've been talking about. And you can share your answer in the chat box. So I'm just checking to see who else has joined us. Hi Keith from Connecticut. Hi Scott from Dallas, and also Brad as well from California. So welcome to everybody who's joining us today. Okay, so our very first question. Do you think that the traditional change management processes need to be adapted in order to support the speed and risk associated with modern IT? So if in the chat box, you could definitely put your answer. So type A for yes, B for no, C for undecided. So we're getting quite a few A's. Looks like everybody thinks the answer is A. Don't want to miss, there's so many answers here. Oh, somebody said B. Okay, so it looks like most of you thought the answer was yes to that question. Thanks everybody for participating. Okay, so let's begin. I'm really, really excited to present to you Charles Betts, and he will be talking to you about new change management. Charles, please start your presentation. Thanks so much.
Great, and thank you, Laura. So I am going to share the slideshow. Okay, so you should be seeing a fully expanded presentation. Can you confirm for me, Laura? Okay, I see. Okay, I see nodding. Okay, so the topic of change management is a very important one as the new operating model is upon us. And this is my theme for the year, is that the digital operating model, as a response to increasingly volatile and uncertain economic times, is fundamentally transforming. And I've done a lot of research on this topic and wish I could go into it more deeply. But for the purposes of today's presentation, you'll have to take it on faith that, as Bob Dylan said, the times they are a-changing. One of the ways that we see the new operating model changing is the transition to product teams as a primary operating model basis, including for the infrastructure and operations organization, we're seeing significant declines in organizations that use project management as a primary structuring mechanism, although projects in and of themselves will still persist. And we're seeing functional specialization transforming, and in particular becoming, in many cases, platform teams. The benefits are clear. Product teams are strongly correlated with faster release frequencies. They're correlated with Agile and DevOps transformation generally. They have many benefits. Build-run product teams are correlated with overall business objectives, exceeding expectations on overall business objectives. And again, there's a fair amount of research we have here that I can only touch upon. The outcome of this organizational transformation is to move to what I call the new process reference model. And the new process reference model centers on the product team that uses a variety of techniques to get its jobs done. It is coordinated, chartered, held accountable by value stream capabilities. It's supported by platforms, and most importantly for today, still requires a set of coordination services. Now, these coordination services may look familiar to those of you, especially with an ITIL or traditional IT management background, but they operate in somewhat different ways. They need to be much more automated. They need to have reduced friction. They need to operate at higher tempo, higher speed. They need to not block value. They need to not impose cost of delay. And they themselves become platforms to a certain extent, services to a certain extent. Sometimes they're appropriate for teams, but sometimes they may not be appropriate for teams, especially as teams are starting to germinate, perhaps. Internal startups, for example, might not need the full range of coordination services. Today, however, we're going to talk about change management, and you can see it there on the right. And this is a particularly controversial domain. Not my favorite process, a lot of people will say. And why is that? What are the advantages and disadvantages of change management? Well, I'm going to first articulate that in my recent research at Forrester, we saw clearly that change management improves availability and incident outcomes. There's definitely been some questioning of change management. There's some very well-known research out there from the DORA, the DevOps Research and Assessment, and I respect that research a lot, but that research was focused on the CAB. It was not focused on change management as a process. And change management as a process, organizations that we surveyed that said that they were committed to change management as a process, some of the strongest statistical correlations in the entire report indicated change management was correlated with better availability and incident management outcomes. And there you have it. So what is it about change management that we need? Why does it remain important? It serves three critical functions that as digital professionals, you have to solve for. You may solve for them in various ways, and we'll talk about the Change Advisory Board, the notorious Change Advisory Board, later. But you have to solve the coordination problem, the risk management problem, and I call it now the knowledge problem, although in other versions of this talk, I will simply call it the audit problem. But I like to make it more general. It's about the information, the history, the state changes, understanding what changed by who, where, when, and how. There are many ways to solve for these, and it is absolutely true that the modern digital and DevOps pipeline automates these things in ways that definitely change the environment for the current change management process and the traditional change manager. And that traditional change management process, we have to admit, and I was a consulting architect, a chief architect for the business of IT with a major US bank. I worked extensively with the change manager and the change management process. And this is how people see it. We know it's a gate or it's theater. Please give me my change, right? And a feeling of helplessness, learned helplessness, you know, about the arbitrary decisions that might get handed down from on high. And at its worst, this is what change management has become. We must admit this. So we have to ask the question, and I am particularly grateful to Evolvin for encouraging me to put into a slide format a small story that I've been telling for some time. Because the thing is that there are good reasons for why we got here. Back in the day, computers were big, IT was small. The computers were very fragile. So having a regular conversation about changes made a lot of sense. The Change Advisory Board, and yeah, the demographic composition probably looked a lot like this back then. I went looking for an old meeting picture, and this is what I got. The cab could be small and effective, you know, because these were the people who every day were engineers and dealing with the realities of what was going on. They were highly qualified, and there weren't that many of them. But then we got more computers and lots more people working on them. Times changed. People started lining up out the door for the Change Advisory Board. This was my first experience of a Change Advisory Board at a major retailer here in Minneapolis. There was literally a line out the door. The cab itself got bigger because we had more and more computers and more people who were subject matter experts who needed to weigh in on the changes. And then there was less and less work for any one of those experts to do. Engineering lead, I sat in the cab for 2 hours. Only one change was barely relevant to my area. I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm way too busy. This is a waste of my time. I'm going to send a more junior member of my team. So you lost the expertise on the cab. This is what happened. Unless, of course, there was a mandate that the executives had to sit there, but then the executives were also far away. And so all the executives could do was ask general questions, or the change process owner, who is also in the meeting, started to really fixate on, have you filled out the forms right? You know, are all the I's dotted and are all the T's crossed? And so it degenerated into a gating process and theater. But we still have the problems of coordination, risk, and audit, alignment. How do we know if a change is a good idea or a bad idea? These are fragile digital systems, in many cases now socially, economically, and even life critical. There weren't so many life critical systems back then, you know, let alone systems that, you know, can break a company's entire business model if they go down. And so we have, you know, a increasingly important mandate to get this right. Back in the day, I also have represented it as what I call the change vicious cycle. We have a change failure and a desire to control the change risk. This leads to a slow change process, which then leads to large backlogs of change. And then you've got the temptation, well, we've got all this huge backlog, we need to just brush it away, sweep it away all at once through some big change initiative. And massive amount, you know, massive releases, 9-month release cycles, 18-month release cycles, which are less successful in terms of changes. We know from complex systems theory, you make a small change to a complex system, and then you adjust and watch, and you see what happened. If you make a big batch of change, it's almost certainly going to fail. And that's what led to the notorious 72-hour release marathon starting on the Friday to get the new release of the system in. Horrible times. I've lived through some of that. And so the consensus, the DevOps consensus, essentially framed in terms of change management, was we need to drive towards a virtuous cycle. We need to reduce the batch size of changes. This reduces our work in process. This reduces the impact on the complex system. We can evaluate whether a given change succeeded or not, and then we can roll back or fall forward. And in reality, we still fall forward 99% of the time. Rollback is still very rare. But all of this leads to accelerating the change process, which in turn leads to improving the change and release capability. So if it hurts, do it more. And this was one of the elevator speeches that I was aware of, you know, with one of the major retailers here in Minneapolis, very well-known retailer that has been a pioneer in DevOps. One of the elevator speeches was, we're changing more often so we get better at it. Okay, well, hard for an executive to argue with that. So it was a great elevator pitch, and it really changed the culture there. Modern change management needs to really focus on these 4 areas: automation, delegation, analysis, and standardization. I don't have time to really do a deep dive into all of these, but some of these are covered in more depth in my report on change management, overcome change management gridlock. A few findings from the state of modern technology operations that have found their way into various reports. One thing is agile transformation needs change management. And this was very surprising to me. I'd expected a lot of inverse correlation here. But organizations engaging in or having completed an agile transformation were more likely to view their change process as effective at identifying risk. And they were strongly likely to view the change process as essential to coordination. Companies that agreed with the statement that they have altered or streamlined their change process in the past 3 years because they wanted to be faster and more agile, they were much more likely to report exceeding expectations for business outcomes. So don't throw out your change process, streamline and improve it. But what about the change advisory board? I know companies that have gotten rid of their CAB and have no regrets. You don't need a change advisory board to have a change process, period, full stop. The change advisory board is one mechanism. You know, in the classic sense, it is what we would call a cadenced face-to-face coordination mechanism, using very precise language there. Some organizations focus on decentralization, much more likely, in fact, when with COVID-19, you couldn't meet face-to-face anymore, right? And how can you, and also organizations do it asynchronously. So they federate, they do it a virtual CAB that is not tied to a particular calendar time. Some organizations, if they still want to have a face-to-face or a voice-to-voice conversation, they've made the CAB a standing line item on the weekly Scrum of Scrums meeting, for example. So it gets folded in to a broader coordination process. There's a variety of ways to think about the CAB. Now, change success, how do we measure change? Those of you, and there's a few of you on the phone who are formal change managers, you're very familiar with the metrics on the left, but I want to challenge you that we really want to put those metrics on the left in tension. And the concept of tension metrics is, I think, a very important one. It's metrics that are hard to move simultaneously, like call handle time and customer satisfaction. You know, generally, you can have one or the other, but if you optimize for one or the other, you're not going to have good outcomes. So call handle time and customer sat are great tension metrics. They fight, and moving them both positively is very hard, requires creative thinking. So these are the tension metrics I propose for change management. What's the net promoter score of your change process? What's the percentage of changes that you're managing as standard? Do you have services operating within error budgets, which gives you some leeway and ability to say we don't have to have complete 0% failure rate? We've got some tolerance here because the service itself is resilient. And the actual cost of delay of the change process. Analyzing that's not simple and is a topic for another day, but I'll just seed the idea for you here. And all in all, to mature your change process, I think that it's important to view it as moving through these stages from subjective, very opinion-based, gut feel, shake your gray beards at it, you know, and, just the old school change management from way back in the day. You know, I've got a bad feeling about this. It's not the best way. But in some organizations, it's sad because they don't have the information and the data they need to move even to the more objective form, which is at least dependency and risk aware. At least there's an intent to use the CMDB. There's an intent to follow a process, but this becomes very bureaucratic, and that's where the gating and the theater comes in. But the new change management, data-centric, learning, adaptive, and that is what I'm so pleased to be talking about today with Evolvin. is the idea that we have so much data just spilling out of all of these systems, the digital exhaust from all of the different sources you see here on the screen. I won't read them all off. Gives us such a rich basis for analyzing and understanding whether a given change is advisable, what's the history of a given team. And Sasha will be talking much more about that. And so as we look ahead, again, I encourage you to think about the core reasons why change management exists and think about, well, what does it need to look like in a world of increasing change tempo, where yet digital systems are becoming more and more economically safety and life critical. So we cannot avoid the risk management conversation, but how do we do this at volume and at speed? And I think that Evolvin is pioneering new ways here to solve this absolutely critical problem. And that's why it's my great pleasure to then turn this over to Sasha, CEO of Evolvin, who will talk in more detail about their offerings, perhaps after, I think, another survey, I believe. So maybe it's back over to you, Laura.
Yes, it certainly is. Thanks so much, Charles. We had some really great comments there as well about your slides, and we will be sending the recording out to you via email after the session. So thank you. Brilliant presentation, really informative. And I believe that many participants, many of you today, share some similar ideas. So we will be finding out when you do ask us some questions later on. So are we ready for another poll question? Yeah, I think we are. So again, if you can just share your answers into the chat box for us. And just a reminder that you do have the chance to win the new Apple AirPod Pros. So I hope that my entry counts too as well for those. Okay, ready for the next question. So to what degree do you believe that the current model of the Change Advisory Board is effective? Type A for very effective, type B for somewhat effective, and type C if you believe that it's not effective at all. Just see what kind of answers we're getting. Quite mixed actually, some A's, lots of B's, one C there. Yeah, a bit more mixed than for the first question that we had. So, and someone else has said somewhat effective. So thank you all. We will be writing down your answers and collating them later on. So as Charles mentioned, we next have Sasha up. So Sasha, please take it away, and Sasha will be talking about some strategies for maintaining control while continuing to accelerate changes. Okay, thanks, Sasha.
All right, thank you, Laura. And first of all, let me share my screen. And first of all, thank you, Charles, for your presentation. That's very insightful, and I think it's very also innovative approach. And I'm really happy to see how aligned we are, right? You know, in our strategy, in our product strategy, and go-to-market strategy, with this vision of the new change management, a new, more agile change management. So you were talking about this tension, about the tension between the speed and the control, and we see it all the time with our customers, you know, with enterprises we are talking to, and in many cases, as they kind of try to figure out what the right balance is, this balance gets compromised. And you know, we see it as a form of stability incidents, of compliance failures, of security breaches. I mean, almost every week, essentially, we see in both, you know, public news and professional publications some story, right? You know, in December it was a story about Google, you know, and before this was a story about Amazon, and so on about their outages and about their issues. And when you kind of, if you follow up, and in a few days, you find, you know, the explanation of the reason, and the reason typically is it was a change, right? And you talk about, in many cases, a very advanced organizations, in you know, probably this very automated and very savvy in their approach, and still having this issue with a change. And at the same time, you know, you have also organizations that only starting their kind of digital transformation journey, and they're experiencing you know, change-driven issues as well, in spite of kind of formal change management process and CAB and so on and so on. So kind of both, I would say, like all the stages of maturity are still lacking. And why are they lacking? We believe that it is because actually the technology organizations, IT organizations, the DevOps organization are still flying blind. With all the tools available, with all the processes available, with all the automation available, they're still flying blind. Why? Because they miss visibility into actual changes as part of the change management process. And when we say actual changes, we mean not the change request, not the deployment artifacts, planned deployments, or deployments even running through my CI/CD pipeline. We speak about this granular modifications of configuration parameters, of database schema attributes, of content, data fields within the database. All these granular modifications that happen as a result of manual or automated activities that could be planned or also unplanned. And there's a lot of different examples of all the different issues that you can actually see on the slide. I will not go into details here, that are driven by these actual changes. And the plan could be perfect, and the risk assessment could be very correct, but still there will be an issue. Why? Because the actual change resulting of the plan somehow either went wrong or generated unpredicted impact. And if we generally think about IT, IT is all about the change. First, we plan the change, we build the change, we execute the change, and then, as the change is deployed in production environment, we start to monitor for the impact of the change. We want to ensure that we're keeping the environment stable. I would even say, in spite of all the changes that we need to implement to address evolving business requirements. So change is a part of the entire, I would say, kind of life cycle of IT. And let's first look at the kind of left side, the plan, build, execution. All of them, all these parts need to really address the question, what actually changed on the left or the right. We'll start with the left. And actually here, Charles, I really love this diagram. And by the way, for everyone, on the slide at the bottom, you see the name of the blog, I believe, where Charles published this diagram. And I think it's brilliant because it actually shows a vision for the framework or for the platform that can help to balance this need for speed that comes from the release management, release automation platform in any form, right? CI/CD or something else, and the control part, which is actually could be based, could be effective only if it's automated, if it's based on analytics. And this is a way, to really create this new change management by relying on automation and change analytics, by providing a healthy balance, between the speed and control. We automate on one hand and we make things faster, but we still control them through this analytics machine that sits on top of the automation and ensures that things don't go wrong. Now, if we will think about the kind of the right side, what happens after we deploy it again, after we released, the change, about the monitoring. This right side, this piece or this stage of the life cycle, and also misses the visibility into actual changes. If you look, again, it's the most advanced concept of observability, introduced as a part of a SRE practice invented and implemented by Google. What are the three pillars of observability? Logs, metrics, traces. But if you really look, like, what information do you collect in logs and metrics and traces? This is all symptom information. It's information that helps you to identify the presence of the issue or development of the issue and location of the issue. It's still not the root cause. I mean, if we do agree that a significant portion, if not majority of the issues are caused by a change, then change is a root cause. And change should be also the part of this kind of monitoring space, ensuring that you don't need just reverse the symptom to get to the root cause, but you can go directly to the source, directly to the change that caused the issue. So how does Evolvent address this challenge? How Evolvent actually closes this gap of missing visibility or missing awareness of actual changes? our platform has three key technology pillars. One, we are detecting the actual changes across the end-to-end environment. We prioritize the changes, highlighting the important changes, the most risky one, using machine learning-based change analytics. And we have most of our patents actually are coming, around this algorithms and the architecture of this analytics engine. And then we correlate and integrate evolving data collected by Evolvent and results of the analytics into your existing processes and tools. Correlate and integrate. And Evolvent can perfectly work standalone by collecting information and analyzing it. But of course, you can get it could be more insightful. You can generate additional insights by putting actual changes into the context, as well as it helps to integrate this notion of the actual change into the overall set of operational processes. So if we kind of take a bit of a deeper look into these capabilities, in terms of monitoring, Evolvent collects information across the end-to-end environment, right? From data center to virtualized environment to containerized environment, private cloud, public cloud, and we collect information from application down to the infrastructure layer, going into the most granular details, wherever we can, down to the individual configuration parameter, again, individual field in the application master data. Or individual attribute of a particular element of a data structure or application file and so on. We look into all these different types of the changes, configuration changes, application changes, data changes, and so on. And it was very important. We also collect this information frequently and near real time. So it's like always up-to-date, fresh information. I saw a question there asking, how do we collect actually this information? So kind of digressing a bit into technical detail. For traditional physical and virtual servers, hosted in data center or just running as a kind of brownfield environment in a cloud, you put an agent, Evolvent agent, on the server. So we use our own technology to collect this data because no one else out there goes so deep and so and so wide across the entire environment. However, having this new generation of technologies like containerized environment, like for example Kubernetes, or cloud platforms, these platforms are much more open, and we actually succeed to collect very detailed and extensive information about these platforms agentless, without a need in the agent. So agent-based for kind of traditional data center-based technologies, physical virtual servers, agentless for containerized environments and cloud. But again, it's all about relying on our own technology to get to this level of the details. And maybe again, I talk about the details just to illustrate this concept. For something like as basic as a Windows operating system, Evolvent collects out of the box without actually being instructed about 3,000 configuration parameters, give or take, depending on the type of the Windows setup, not counting all the critical files, just configuration parameters, 3,000. Okay, for an operating system. And you go up the stack and it will be more and more and more configuration. And why we do this? Because it's important. That's where actual changes happen. Not every small detail can actually cause an issue. Now, because we collect such granular data, we collect a lot of data. And making this data actionable, we need to prioritize it and for the customers, for the users. And we do this by applying the analytics. Analytics actually look at a set of markers for each of these granular changes we detect. Who made the change, when the change was made, how was it executed, what is the value of the change, what is the history of the change, how does it change benchmark across environment, and so on and so on. We have about 25 of these markers that generate about 180 data points. Then we apply a decision tree, and we have pattern for the decision tree to take all these results, all these data points, and integrate them into the risk score, which is a probability or likelihood of a change to cause an issue. So in the end, we have customers where we collect, up to 6 million changes. We detect up to 6 million actual changes per day. 6 million. I mean, this is a lot of information. Telling the customer, hey, you had 6 million changes in the last 24 hours. That's not very helpful. right? But so what we do, we highlight and say, hey, you did have 6 million changes, but I mean, look at this 50. Why? Because if you don't, there's a good chance that they will cause an issue. Now, as I have mentioned, Evolving also integrates into the existing landscape to create this kind of picture of operational awareness that take you from what was planned, what actually happened, and what was the impact of these actual changes. And having this operational awareness picture, you can effectively manage agile processes, right? At any point of time, and you can use it like upstream, downstream. You can do it for root cause analysis, understand if issue happens, what actually caused the issue, but also use it to prevent the issues and predict them before they actually happen. Evolving, first of all, can integrate into the agile platforms, right, such as a CI/CD pipeline. And while it detects actual change as a result of deployment starting from lower environments and going up to higher environments, we also use the metadata of the CI/CD pipeline to try to put the actual changes in the context and trace them back to the deployments that cause actual changes, the build that was used in this deployment package and this deployment, commits that were included in this build, and actual changes in the code and the configuration file and so on, and that were executed and committed to the code baseline and were essentially participated in the build. So, I mean, having this kind of correlation, one of the things that we can do is to create this automated CAB essentially that Charles was mentioning, to create this automated risk gateway across CI/CD pipeline that will look and assess the operational risk of actual change as it goes through the pipeline. And thinking about amount of the changes going through the pipeline, pretty impossible to do this manually. At the same time, we can also, a lot of organizations, they are transitioning from old ways of working, ITIL-based processes to the new agile environment. And at the same time, Evolving also connects to the service management platforms, service desk, like for example, ServiceNow, and to use information in this environment, in this platform, and correlate it with actual change again to provide the context. Like for example, we can look at the change requests. The change requests are still used to approve the changes, and correlate the actual change with change requests, and then we can tell, hey, what was the result? What was actually the output of the change request? And if there are any unauthorized changes, which is unauthorized change for most of enterprises, is both the stability concern, the compliance concern, of course, and regulators pay a lot of attention to unauthorized changes these days, and also security concern, because unauthorized change is both possibly opening a breach and also could be a sign of the attack, right? So having this ability to correlate to CI/CD pipeline on one hand, to IT service management platform on the other hand, we have established this link of actual change versus expected, what was planned, what actually happened. And then monitoring tools such as AIOps tool, APM tools, infrastructure monitoring, and so on, they provide information about the impact of the changes, right? Because again, if changes are the cause of the issues, that when you make a change, if there is no measurement, negative measurement or degradation of performance and availability detected by monitoring tool, it's pretty much a good change. If there is a degradation, there were bad changes. So changes help to assess the impact. And then again, this integration, this correlation helps to do a few things. A, to estimate, if the change was good or bad, but also if something happens, if there is this alert or event or key event identified by a monitoring tool, Evolving can correlate it back to the changes causing them. You have a spike in CPU, like a very basic thing. Maybe it's because of this patch that you executed a few hours ago. So what is very important, like Charles, you were talking about different kind of stages of maturity of change management process, right? I will take it a bit kind of further and say that change management evolution is part of overall digital transformation. And we talk, and again, we work with organizations and different stages of digital transformation, starting from traditional organizations that have manual process, just start to look into digital transformation, maturing organizations that start to automate their processes and start transition to DevOps, for example, modern organizations that run agile processes and kind of fully transition to DevOps. I want to call like a future organizations that really like, zero touch, fully automated, self-healing, fully elastic organization. And there are a few of those. And what is interesting, we found that this need for this automated change control and change awareness is essential for organization in any stage of maturity. The use case is changing, right? Traditional organization will be looking for change control to identify these unauthorized changes, to look for fat finger mistakes, to really understand what happens in their environment, because again, people are doing what they're doing, and not always you can figure out what they did, just out of the change management record if you have them. But also when you go to the most advanced environment, as I mentioned, like the futuristic, zero touch, self-healing, and so on environment, they care about change control too, very much, because this environment essentially is a big machine, producing the changes. Some of the changes are done by the system itself. Some changes are pushed, by the developers. And in the end, it kind of becomes a black box because of its complexity. It's very difficult to understand what is the state of my environment as a result of all the changes that happen at any given moment. And what we found is that in this kind of environment, maybe incident recovery is much quicker and maybe simpler, right? To restore my previous state, and this kind of like with right architecture and right process doable. But problem management becomes a huge issue. And that's what we hear from the organizations, that, yeah, in many cases, I recover from incident in seconds, but then I still need to make changes, right? And understand why the problem has happened and why like my changes were rolled back and so on. Sometimes it takes, days and weeks. Again, because I can't really reproduce this in my, pre-production environment, even if this environment is a mirror of the production, just because the specific state, the specific situation is kind of impossible. I can't really reproduce this in my pre-production environment. So change control, going back, the change control and change awareness are essential in each of these stages, but more than that, this automated change control actually helps organizations to migrate from one stage to another as well. And if you think about like organization going from traditional processes to automated processes, one of the things that we observe is that some organizations still don't feel comfortable to completely revoke, access to the servers without, automated, without deploying source automated tools. So you have like coexistence of automated processes and manual access. And what happens then is that people that are used to manual processes, yeah, I deploy everything automatically, and then I go on, SSH or Telnet into the box and execute manual changes. And this is a culture that's very difficult to change and very difficult, to track. And here, we have customers using Evolvent as this automated change control approach to ensuring that these automated processes are actually followed. A very simple, kind of story. We had a customer where we're like, detecting these actual changes, identifying what was done automatically, what was done manually, and just distributing these reports. That's what our customer wanted. Just sending across, the team reports. These are the manual changes. That's when they were executed. That's what, they touched. That's what actually who was doing these changes. And the first thing is like people asking, like, how do you know? Oh, we have actually, automated change control. Right? And first report, second report, within months, there was 0 manual changes. So that's exactly what the management wanted. So again, change control, automated change control, change awareness are essential for each of the stages of digital transformation, but it also will help organizations to move from to move from one stage to another. So one thing, one picture is still more effective than 100 words. So one thing that I wanted to do is also to show you the product. I quickly show a few kind of key functions and capabilities of the product. So you see, what does this automated change control platform means? So let me switch to the web console of Evolvent. And Evolvent, by the way, just kind of as a note, Evolvent is available as an on-premise solution and software as a service as well. Right now, we look at the kind of my demo instance that runs on our software as a service. I'm looking right now in in a dashboard representing this kind of control information about the AWS environment, right? So what do we see here, right? First of all, we see the consolidated view of AWS native services, and the red circles represent the fact that Evolvent identified high-risk changes. Again, in our language, the changes with likelihood to cause issues in the configuration or state or content of the services. And on the right, we see the kind of the different layer, right? You know, maybe the application layer, and that is running, you know, that the changes are run through the code pipeline, AWS code pipeline as an example. And we see different microservices and different stages or different environments the pipeline goes through. And red circles represent here the deployment that includes changes that again has a potential to cause an issue once moved into production. So as an operator, active, again, here is, you know, like we automatically estimate before there is an incident. We said, hey, you know, you deployed in a lower environment, for example, and there is an kind of potential for a failure, future failure, or you made a change somehow in your AWS infrastructure. Well, the change may be not as great as you thought. So an operator, it could be a DevOps engineer, depending on the organization, SRE engineer, Cloud Ops engineer, or even, you know, IT Ops engineer. It depends really on the organization. Generally will click to investigate, like with any monitoring tool. And what you know, once we click, we see the these risky changes that were identified by Evolvent. And like, you know, we see at the top all the different services, auto-scaling groups, EC2 instances, Lambda function, S3 buckets. And at the bottom, we see the details, the actual changes detected by Evolvent. And let me show you an example. What, you know, I talk about actual granular changes all the time, but like what actual granular change means, it really goes down, as I mentioned, to individual configuration parameter. We'll say that for auto-scaling group called host 13, a parameter health check grace period was increased to 3,000, right? So for the scaling group, essentially, kind of defines a timeout of when we believe that, you know, the server in the group or the resource in the group is not available. So it was increased to 3,000. What was it before? I click and I see that, you know, before we detected the change, it was 300. So pretty significant change. So it was an authorized deployment. In authorization column, we see that we can associate it with specific deployment. And we see this red bubble that represents risks. It actually gives us also visibility into what is the explanation for this risk. Like, why do we think that this change is risky? Because we see it because, you know, we looked, you know, at the cross environment and the kind of type of these changes, history of the change. We see that this is like a pretty significant change. You know, 300 to 3,000 for this type of prayer. This is something that looks too much, right? And that's why Evolvent highlighted, you know, and this change as risky. You know, from that point, you can actually do things like, you know, you're still not sure. And let's say that, you know, you're not an expert in auto-scaling groups. You can share this information, just, you know, copy link and pass it in your, you know, Slack channel or send by email to the expert that will take a look and confirm, you know, if this change makes sense. And you can actually you know, initiate auto remediation. Evolvent will not do remediation on its own, but it will connect to existing tools like AWS Formation, Terraform, Ansible, Puppet Chef, and so on, and will produce the artifact, relevant artifact like Ansible Playbook or Puppet Manifest that will, you know, define this change of revert of the change that you can plug, that will be plugged into the overall remediation sequence, and we'll just can kick off this remediation service sequence using one of these tools. Or again, if you kind of maintain still in transition and have both, you know, the ITIL based and automated process, you can open and change requests. In this case, in the demo, we do it in ServiceNow, requiring remediation. Or again, if your process is based on the incidents for such a situation, you can open an incident from Evolve in ServiceNow. And I'll go back to dashboard, but one disclaimer, I'm showing the dashboard, but Evolve is a very open platform. You can extract all this data that I'm showing and execute any function using a REST API, or we have materialized SQL views that you can use to query the data and build your own dashboards and reports and views. The data could be produced, provided using offline alerts and and reports, or as well, the data could be pushed in the Kafka data pipe. So there are all these ways that, again, our goal is to integrate into your existing processes, into your existing landscape, so that you will seamlessly consume this data and use it, again, to prevent the issues. Now, I was showing the infrastructure part, but let's take a quick look into the application part, right? And application, when we look at the deployment, so we'll actually see what was the content of the deployment, and we see it on the kind of right side. Analytics will automatically tag all these different changes and set up these tags so that you can easily understand the context of the changes and slice and dice the data. Like we see the deployment comes from a specific build. There are some anomalies detected in this deployment. It includes certain packages. And these packages, include certain commits, and we can see the commit messages. But generally, right, we can see kind of red anomalies. We can click on anomaly, and we can see that there are certain changes in the code. Why is there like developer anomaly? What it actually means? It means that we found that the code was touched by a person or by developers that typically doesn't touch this code. So that's suspicious, and we can specifically see what really is the change is, right? We see where the change was executed, and we can click and see the change. So in this case, a certain set of quite a lot of dependencies were removed. Right, the same type of action. We can roll it back through the pipeline. It's a gateway, so we can roll it back. We can open a ticket, and we can share this information. We can initiate review. Again, whatever your process is actually will integrate into this process. And just the last thing, because we were talking about the proactive approach and proactive value of the control, there is another quick capability, what happens if the issue does happen, or the incident or problem, and I want to understand quickly what the reason for this problem is. So we see as a bottom widget, there are certain alerts, in this case coming from AWS CloudWatch. We see that service is not available. We click on the alert to investigate it, and very quickly, Evolve just brings a short list of the changes that could be explaining this unavailability of service. Like one of them, for example, is that a limit of the upper limit of the memory for specific microservice, and we can see it's in the Kubernetes container, was significantly decreased. It was 1 gigabyte before, now it's 128 megabytes. That could be a reason, coupled with a few code changes that could be needed. It could be needing more memory. So here I will stop. Just want to leave some time for the questions, and thank you for that. And let me stop sharing. And Laura, I think we're ready for the questions.
Yes, thank you, Sasha. That was absolutely brilliant. So much information in there for everybody to digest, I think. So as we reach the top of the hour, we will be opening it up for questions, as Sasha mentioned. So if you do have any questions that you haven't already typed into the Q&A, please do so that we can work through those. Or you could actually unmute yourself if you wanted to, speak out your question. Don't hesitate to do that as well. So one of our questions here from Bjorn is, how high is the cost in terms of performance of running your agent? With the high rates of measurements, there may be an impact on weaker systems.
Right. So it's a very good question, and we actually we run, just as a reference, we run on very sensitive business systems, including like low latency trading platforms. And why we can do it? Because you actually control amount of resources allocated to an agent when it executes a collection, right? So you say don't use more than X, memory, megabytes of memory, or X% of the CPU. An agent will be throttling itself not to excessive resource. So you always know, like, what is this controlled overhead. At the same time, the agent is actually executing periodical scans, and you completely control when scans are done, what is the frequency, is it like every minute, every 5 minutes, every hour, right? So using this combination of scheduling and controlled resources, we have customers with the most sensitive systems successfully running evolving collections and getting, the value I was talking about.
Thanks for that, Sasha. So we do have a question as well, which is, what type of changes do you think no longer need to be run through a cab?
That's an excellent question. I mean, I actually had an organization, and Charles, maybe, you know what? I will pause here. I think you are better equipped, to answer this question.
The essence of the answer here is dynamic control. It is, you have to have the data to understand what the change risk profile is. The concept of a change credit rating, for example. I mean, the changes that don't go through the cab are changes that are less risky. What is the purpose of the cab? It's to get people together to talk about changes that may require human-to-human coordination, right? Well, if a change is limited in scope, there is the new trendy term is limited blast radius, and the team performing it has a great track record with that class of change, then I don't see that there's a need for a change advisory board meeting on that topic. And this was de facto what happened. I mean, back in the day, we would have changes that, were above the line, below the line for the cab, but it wasn't as formalized. But now we see companies like even Target is on the record. They got up at a conference, and I was there physically present and documented their statements. They believe in the change credit rating concept. And so the same change, team A has to go before the cab because they don't have a good change track record. Same exact change, from a technical perspective, team B, they've been nailing it for 18 months. Why drag them in front of the cab? And so in some ways, if you apply the analytics correctly, this is something that is then within the hands of the team. It empowers them. The same way that, we control our own personal credit rating, and it's within our own control, right? That is, I think, the essence of the answer is that you need a more dynamic and adaptive approach, rather than simply saying, well, if the change meets these, 3 criteria, it's got to go in front of the cab. No, I mean, we've got the digital systems landscape is just too big. I'm sorry, I'm talking too long here, and we're approaching time.
That sounds great. Thanks so much, Charles. So another question we have is, does Evolvent integrate with any ITSM tools?
Yes, we do. We integrate with ServiceNow, Remedy, Sharewell, and so on, Symphony, and so on. So we support, again, environments at any or organization at any stage, ITIL-based, ITSM-based organizations, and the modern organizations that completely move to CI/CD pipeline.
Thanks, Sasha. So is this tool also capture network changes?
Yes, we do.
Right, thank you. I'm just checking there's a question just for that. Right, regarding commit matching of issues, what source control systems are supported?
So again, GitHub, Bitbucket, SVN, but again, the product is very, like our platform is, like technically speaking, again, very flexible. And even if there is some things that are not supported right now, to get integration and support is definitely not an issue. But these are the ones that we are supporting.
Thanks, Sasha. So we have another question, which is, increased delivery pace requires more trust delegates to local teams. Do you agree?
I'll take this one. Trust but verify. I mean, the thing is that with smaller changes, hopefully the impact of any one change going wrong is not as severe as, big, huge, major change, major rewrite. And so you have a faster feedback loop where you say, okay, we build trust incrementally. I still would be very concerned about saying, well, we're just going to trust the team, and there's 6 months worth of backlog that they've batched into one enormous release, and who knows what's going to happen. I don't trust that kind of a change. Nobody should. But the trouble is that getting visibility and actually doing anything meaningful about those kinds of changes was virtually impossible. Now, when we move to a faster change cadence with smaller batches of change, it's like, yeah, I trust you because your last 30 changes went fine, you know, and with smaller change cadence, we can now have that kind of a conversation. So it's not blind trust, I think, is, you know, the concern here. No, it's absolutely not blind. It's very clear-sighted trust based on track record.
Fantastic. Okay, so we're just checking to see if we have any more questions before we continue. Okay, we have a new question, which is, can you detect unauthorized changes?
That's one of the core functionalities of this automated change control, right? You know, by correlating changes with, again, plan approved deployments and, you know, again, on the more agile, in more agile environments or change requests in ITIL driven environments, absolutely we can detect unauthorized changes.
Great, thank you, Sasha. Yeah, so just to shout out if anybody has any more questions that they'd like to pop in either the Q&A or the chat, and we will endeavour to answer them for you. So we have a question here. It is the tool also relevant for SecOps?
It's an excellent question, and actually yes, because you know we see the change having you know three kind of dimensions of the impact, which is the stability, compliance, and security. And so obviously you know the collecting and analyzing information we do, you know, we have actually use cases for stability, for compliance, and also for security or SecOps.
Fantastic. We're also getting a lot of thanks for the presentation. Just checking if there's any more questions as well. So we are running out of time, unfortunately, everyone. Okay, so basically we have one more question for the poll before we finish. And this is, how challenging is it for you to view and analyze all actual changes occurring in your IT environments? Type A for very challenging, B for somewhat challenging, or C for not challenging at all. We're getting lots of A's. We had a C in the chat box. It's just been such a great session today. Another C, mostly A. Somebody said B. Looks like A is the winner there. Okay, so I think we will close now. Thanks to everybody for joining. Charles, Sasha, you've been absolutely fantastic. Thank you for leading today's session. Hopefully we can see you soon. We'd love to answer any questions. Sorry. We'd love to answer any questions and continue discussions this week. So if you are interested in having a one-to-one with us, you can have a customized demo and book that in with us. You can email any one of us directly. Thank you all for attending and hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thank you very much.